I now give the floor to Mr. Abdoulaye Bathily.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, I have the honor to address you today for the first time since Storm Daniel hit Derna and surrounding the area on September 10th. I wish to express my condolences to all Libyans who lost their loved ones, homes, and livelihoods. But Derna tragedy is unprecedented in Libya's recorded history. With the Deputy Special Representative, Resident Coordinator, and Humanitarian Coordinator, and other members of UNSMIL's leadership team, I visited the affected area. The human and material cost of this disaster is beyond imagination. In Benghazi, I visited the displaced families from the devastated city. Here in Tripoli, I also attended the funeral ceremony organized by relatives of the deceased and missing persons. As a result of this tragedy, thousands of lives were lost. In my visit to Derna, a few days after the storm, I saw the first-hand the magnitude of the disaster and heard from families about their houses, their losses, including individuals who lost all their loved ones. I saw an apocalyptic scene where large portions of the city were literally swallowed by the water. In support of the affected family and local communities, UN agencies and local and international partners were on the ground within hours, providing life-saving assistance and conducting search and rescue operations. Some 6 weeks after the floods, humanitarian assistance provided by more than 24 humanitarian organizations has reached over 146,000 people in need of humanitarian support and basic services. As the focus of response efforts transition to early recovery and reconstruction, UN agencies have undertaken initial assessments of the damage, needs, and requirements for the next phase aimed at supporting people to get their lives back to normal as soon as possible. The Derna disaster has shown with spontaneous and admirable unity, solidarity, and compassion of the ordinary Libyans across the country. At the institutional level, the Presidential Council and the Government of National Unity stood ready and mobilized for the support, just as the HOR and HOR-appointed governments backed in their respective capacity the rescue operations. The Libyan National Army, LNA, mobilized its structure and established an operational room to support the activities of the rescue teams. In a remarkable show of solidarity, many armed formations of the West joined their colleagues from the East. Despite the lack of national coordination between different institutions, their individual mobilization immediately after the tragedy augured a national momentum of unity inspired by the disaster. Mr. President, I would like to commend Libya's international partners from the region and beyond for their prompt and efficient support to the Libyan people during this tragedy. The Derna disaster has revealed severe governance deficits through several issues, such as the lack of maintenance of the dam system, the management of resources, as well as the lack of an effective mechanism for disaster management and prevention. On the top of these issues, the absence of a unified political decision-making at the national level made matters more challenging. Had these governance issues been resolved at the national level, they would have mitigated the impact of the tragedy. Mr. President, I'm deeply concerned about the continued division of the leadership of Libya over the reconstruction of Derna and its surrounding affected areas. Leaders continue so far to display competition and rivalries as to which entity will exert exclusive authority over the reconstruction efforts. In the East and the West, different initiatives are conducted in this regard. From the outset, UNSMIL has called on the leaders to establish a unified national platform to assess the damage and undertake the reconstruction project, as related costs will be mostly borne by Libyan national resources. Most international partners have expressed their readiness to support such a national mechanism as an instrument of transparency, accountability, and efficiency. Uncoordinated initiative could lead to further disappointment of the citizens of Derna and of the people of Libya who aspire for quick recovery and efficient reconstruction of the bereaved localities. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I am pleased to announce that the electoral process has registered some progress. The 6+6 committee has completed its work in early October. In spite of enormous pressure and laborious deliberation in Buznika, in Morocco, as well as in Tripoli, Benghazi, and other cities in Libya where they met, the members of the 6+6 have achieved compromise on many contentious issues. The revised electoral laws were issued by the House of Representatives on October the 5th and officially received by the High National Electoral Commission on October 9th. UNSMIL commends the effort of the committee and welcomes the progress that was reached. Mr. President, this Council will recall that UNSMIL has consistently advocated for electoral laws that are technically and politically implementable. In light of that, the new electoral laws call for the following observations. From a technical perspective, the revised laws are an improvement to the previous draft laws, as several concerns identified by HNEC and UNSMIL. These include, among others, voting eligibility for members of the military, clarity on the sequencing of the elections, clarity on the Senate and the House of Representatives seat distribution, and clarity on electoral dispute resolution mechanism. From a political perspective, The most politically contentious issues highlighted in my June and August briefings remain unresolved. Notably, the mandatory second round of the presidential elections. Contrary to common practices, this provision required the two front-runners in the presidential election to go for a runoff, irrespective of the percentage of vote won. It is linked to the eligibility criteria and illustrates the deep mistrust among the political class. It could potentially be misused to exclude candidates from the second round, to question a potential majority, result and disrupt the whole electoral process. The linkage between presidential and parliamentary elections. While the presidential and legislative election can be held on the same day, subjecting the validity of parliamentary elections to that of the presidential elections results from an unspoken political statement and puts the process at a high risk of disruption. The formation of a new government, a highly contentious issue. A new government can only be the result of a negotiation among key actors. Furthermore, it stands to reason that creating a level playing field for all candidates requires a unified cabinet that enjoys public trust to lead the country to elections. However, to avoid repeat of the August 2022 crisis unleashed by the unilateral appointment of the Bashaga government, it is necessary for this government to be the outcome of political negotiations amongst major players. The deletion of articles allowing holders of administrative numbers to register and vote, which were included in the June version of the draft electoral laws, may pose additional challenges to the implementation of elections in the south of the country and limit the inclusivity of the elections. Regrettably, gender provisions for the Senate elections also remain unchanged, with only 6 seats allocated to women out of 90 seats in the Senate. The electoral laws provide that the elections have to take place within 240 days from their entry into force. However, the High National Electoral Commission informed UNSMIL that the implementation of the electoral laws will only begin once the issue of a new government is resolved, in line with Article 86 on the law of the presidential elections and Article 90 of the National Assembly law. Finally, there are disagreements between the HOR and the High State Council over the electoral laws. The High State Council disputes the amendment made to the HOR adopted electoral laws and insists that the Buznika version prevails. The rejection of the amendment by the 6+6 after Buznika by the SCS constitutes a political option that risks jeopardizing the hard-won gains of the two chambers and the compromise we have achieved. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, in Tripoli, a fragile calm has returned, although tensions persist between Tripoli-based armed groups. the inherent precariousness of dynamics between these security actors reinforce the need for an inclusive political process. In Benghazi, the LNA attempted to arrest the former Minister of Defense in the government of national accord, Mahdi al-Barghati, led to armed clashes in the densely populated area of Benghazi. The 6-8 October fighting caused several casualties, material damages, and a communication shutdown for almost a week. Thanks to the intervention of community leaders, the matter has calmed down for now. I call on all to opt for the de-escalation through dialogue and place protection of civilians principles at the center of operations. Mr. President, the human rights situation remains concerning, with continuing attacks on civic space and the rule of law, which contribute to the deterioration of the overall situation. Arbitrary arrests and detentions across the country have also been recorded, including of members of political parties and think tanks. I'm equally preoccupied by systematic deportations and mass expulsions of migrants and asylum seekers from Tunisia to Libya, who are in desperate need of international protection. Mr. President, I would like to commend the positive role and moral responsibility taken by tribal leaders in diffusing tensions across Libya, as seen in Tripoli last August and Benghazi last week. I call on them, those community leaders, to strengthen their role as actors of peace and national reconciliation. Distinguished Council members, to conclude, the finalization of the electoral law by the 6+6, in spite of the remaining issues to be fine-tuned and agreed upon through political compromise among the major players, offers the opportunity for breaking the current stalemate in Libya. However, the rejection of the amendment of the 6+6 after Buznica by the SCS constitutes a political option that risks jeopardizing the hard-won gains of the two chambers. I call on the ACS to renounce this position, which risks obstructing the electoral process. The controversy between HOR and ACS over the laws, the highly contentious issue of a new government, the linkage between the presidential and parliamentary elections, and the possibility of misuse of the conditionalities attached to the mandatory second round of the presidential elections, put the whole electoral process at risk of another political crisis, which could lead to a remake of December 2021 scenario or the August 22 crisis. In this regard, and in line with UNSMIL conflict prevention mandate, I wish to alert you to the risks of violent conflict involved by a unilateral appointment of a government by any of rival parties, and call on this council to use its influence to prevent this dangerous occurrence and mobilize the Libyan parties for dialogue. Since my last briefing, I have engaged with major stakeholders at the institutional level, as well as Libyans of all walks of life, to encourage them to display their goodwill and good faith for the success of the electoral process. Only the genuine commitment of all to serve the interests of the people for peace, stability, and prosperity can produce a positive electoral outcome. Laws alone cannot and will not make elections happen. They need to be supported by the buy-in of a wide range of stakeholders, including the major institutional players, but also military and security actors, political parties and candidates, community leaders, civil society organizations, women and youth groups, media professionals, and other constituencies. I call on all stakeholders, including major leaders, to meet and agree on a binding political settlement towards a peaceful electoral process, the backbone of which will be a unified government to lead Libya to elections. UNSMIL stands ready to facilitate this process. Finally, I also reiterate my call on all international partners of Libya to support this electoral process as the only way to provide the country with legitimate institutions and a future of peace, unity, stability, and prosperity. This outcome is long awaited by Libyan citizens who wish to close the chapter of conflict and risk of disintegration for their country. The ongoing crisis in Sudan, the Sahel, and the broader region, and their potential spillover effects in Libya constitute serious threat, but must not be taken lightly. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Bathily for his briefing.